In an unprecedented turn of events, the United Kingdom finds itself thrust into uncharted constitutional territory. The nation's Supreme Court has delivered a ruling that has sent shockwaves reverberating through every corridor of power. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been formally removed from office through judicial decree, not by electoral defeat or resignation, but by legal expulsion. This extraordinary decision represents a seismic shift in British governance, leaving the machinery of government paralyzed and a nation grappling with profound questions about the balance between judicial authority and democratic will. The ruling arrived like a bolt from clear skies. What began as a seemingly obscure legal challenge, one that political insiders and media observers alike had dismissed as insignificant, had been quietly advancing through the judicial system, gaining momentum in closed courtrooms. The case centered on allegations that the Prime Minister had deliberately withheld critical legal counsel concerning parliamentary procedures, information that could have revealed serious misconduct at the highest echelons of government. When Starmer denied these allegations and attempted to deflect scrutiny, the judiciary did not relent. Instead, Britain's most senior judges issued a declaration that would reshape the political landscape. The Prime Minister had violated his constitutional obligations and was therefore unfit to continue serving in public office. The immediate aftermath was nothing short of chaotic. Within moments of the 9:47 a.m. announcement, the seat of government descended into crisis. Downing Street's gates were secured by security personnel as staff members hurriedly departed carrying boxes of documents and personal belongings. Senior government officials, including Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who was reportedly overcome with emotion, retreated from public view. The deafening silence from ministerial ranks spoke volumes. No press conferences, no official explanations, only an eerie quiet that seemed to foreshadow darker developments ahead. The political tremors quickly spread beyond Westminster's historic walls. Social media platforms erupted not with partisan celebration, but with genuine shock and anger from Starmer's own supporters, who felt betrayed by revelations that the leader they'd championed for his integrity may have concealed the truth. Parliament convened emergency sessions, while constitutional scholars struggled to contextualize what many were calling the gravest crisis in modern British democratic history. Even Buckingham Palace received briefings, with whispers suggesting that royal advisers had been discreetly preparing for precisely this outcome days before it materialized. A detail that, if confirmed, would fundamentally alter perceptions of how much the monarchy knew and when. Across Britain's cities and towns, citizens gathered spontaneously outside courthouses and government buildings. These weren't typical partisan demonstrations. Instead, people carried handmade signs demanding truth, transparency, and accountability. These gatherings represented something deeper than political protest. They were the awakening of a populace confronting the collapse of promises they'd been given. The man who had campaigned on restoring honor to government now stood accused by the courts of burying evidence and breaking the public's trust. Inside Westminster's chambers, panic replaced the usual parliamentary order. With Starmer effectively removed, Britain found itself without constitutional leadership. Cabinet ministers declined to assume interim authority, and Labour Party insiders privately acknowledged they were witnessing a collapse without any coherent plan. The opposition Conservative Party remained conspicuously quiet, paralyzed by a terrifying realization. If the judiciary possessed the power to remove one prime minister, no future leader could consider themselves beyond reach. An unspoken fear took hold across all political factions. The traditional separation between law and political power had fundamentally shifted, with the courts now wielding unprecedented authority over Parliament itself. International reaction came swiftly and with growing concern. Washington issued carefully worded statements calling for stability and democratic continuity. Brussels suspended ongoing trade negotiations pending clarification of Britain's governmental status. European news outlets ran dramatic headlines characterizing the crisis as a British breakdown, while global financial markets responded nervously. The pound sterling weakened, investor confidence wavered, and economic analysts warned of potential ripple effects throughout international markets. Yet beneath the economic turbulence lay a deeper, more existential crisis. The system designed to safeguard democracy had seemingly consumed its own leader, forcing the British public to confront profoundly uncomfortable questions. Was this judicial intervention a triumph of accountability, or did it represent dangerous overreach? Had the rule of law properly checked executive power, or had it effectively staged a constitutional coup? The boundaries between legitimate judicial authority and political interference had never appeared more blurred, leaving the nation to wrestle with a question it hadn't seriously considered in modern times. When the government fails, who truly governs Britain? The Prime Minister's office stood vacant, the cabinet fractured and directionless, Parliament frozen in institutional paralysis. King Charles, the one constitutional figure who might provide steadying leadership, maintained a careful silence, a silence that grew heavier with each passing hour. Britain found itself confronting a scenario not seen in over a century, the complete collapse of political authority with no clear mechanism for restoration. As the crisis deepened, the nation discovered there was no solid ground beneath its feet. The Prime Minister's expulsion had created not merely a political vacuum, but a constitutional void so profound that even Parliament seemed hesitant to speak. Westminster's corridors buzzed with anxious whispers as senior aides disappeared, phones went unanswered, and cabinet ministers refused media appearances. The entire governmental apparatus appeared to have frozen, shocked into stillness by its own implosion. By midday, when the Speaker of the House convened an emergency session, members of Parliament arrived to find no agenda, no leadership, no guidance, only deepening confusion. The chamber that had echoed with centuries of debate now trembled under uncertainty's weight. Outside these halls, a different kind of chaos was unfolding. Citizens gathered not in anger, but in fear, clutching desperate handwritten questions. Who's in charge? Where do we go from here? Violence hadn't erupted, but the disbelief hanging in the air felt combustible, the kind that transforms into fury when answers refuse to materialize. Even seasoned broadcasters and legal experts appeared lost, struggling to find historical precedent for what was unfolding. Some characterized it as a constitutional earthquake. Others whispered about judicial coup. Regardless of the terminology, one fact remained inescapable. Britain had lost its leader, and absolutely no one knew what would follow. The Labour Party's internal collapse accelerated dramatically. Rachel Reeves refused to step into the void, calling any assumption of leadership untenable. Angela Rayner had reportedly gone completely off the grid, unreachable even by senior party officials. Wes Streeting, once viewed as a rising political star, was overheard telling aides, "This isn't politics anymore. It's pure survival." The party that had promised to restore governmental trust was now consuming itself. Internal communications leaked to the press revealed factional warfare erupting within minutes of the court's decision, with advisors pointing fingers, MPs frantically deleting past statements of loyalty, and major donors withdrawing financial support. One insider bluntly assessed the situation. "We're finished. We're witnessing the party's death in real time." Yet this implosion extended far beyond Labour's boundaries. The Conservative opposition found itself equally paralyzed. Rishi Sunak issued a brief, substance-free statement filled with platitudes about stability and unity, but offering no actual direction. No one dared celebrate Starmer's downfall because the precedent was terrifyingly clear. If the courts could remove one prime minister, they could remove any prime minister. Across every political faction, the same existential fear had taken root. The judiciary, traditionally the quiet guardian of legal principles, now wielded power seemingly greater than Parliament itself. Nigel Farage wasted no time weaponizing the outrage, characterizing the situation as a judicial takeover and warning that unelected judges had effectively hijacked British democracy. His rhetoric spread rapidly through online channels, fueling narratives that the rule of law had transformed into rule by fear. At Buckingham Palace, the silence from King Charles grew increasingly significant. Royal insiders suggested the king had been engaged in continuous consultations with constitutional advisors, deliberating whether to publicly intervene. Conflicting reports emerged, some claiming he'd been informed of the ruling in advance and had privately endorsed it, others insisting he'd been blindsided like everyone else. Either scenario carried profound risks. Prior knowledge would invite accusations of monarchical interference in democratic governance. Ignorance would suggest the crown had been rendered powerless. The stakes had reached unprecedented levels, because in the vacuum created by Starmer's expulsion, British citizens were increasingly looking toward the crown for stability. For the first time in generations, the question wasn't what the king thought, but what action he would take. Leaked reports suggested a royal address was being prepared in secrecy, though no one could confirm when, or even if, it would be delivered. Any words from the king now carried the potential to either unify the fractured nation or shatter it beyond repair. Internationally, initial shock had evolved into deep concern. European leaders publicly called for calm while privately expressing fears that Britain was entering completely uncharted waters. Washington placed intelligence and diplomatic teams on heightened alert. Financial analysts warned that the uncertainty could trigger market freefall within days, and London's stock exchange had already experienced sharp declines. But the genuine danger transcended economics. It was existential. Every minute without leadership intensified doubts about whether Britain's democratic institutions could survive this kind of rupture. The nation that had once taught the world parliamentary democracy was now serving as a cautionary tale of its fragility. Back at Westminster, the crisis continued to deepen. Reports emerged that the Cabinet Office had activated continuity protocols and emergency oversight procedures, meaning the government was now being administered by civil service bureaucracy alone. No policy decisions, no executive leadership, merely institutional preservation. As one official grimly noted to reporters, "We're just trying to keep the ship afloat." Public sentiment began splitting along philosophical fault lines. Some celebrated the court's courage, viewing it as a watershed moment when the rule of law finally held powerful leaders accountable. Others perceived it as democracy's death, a coup executed by unelected judicial figures against the people's will. The debate had transcended politics to become fundamentally philosophical. What does democracy mean when a prime minister can be removed without electoral process? What happens when legal authority supersedes the ballot box? The answers remained disturbingly elusive, and that very uncertainty represented the most dangerous force at play.